Hi, and welcome back to Common Talk about the Commonwealth. I'm State Senator Jim Welch, and today we're very fortunate to have Anthony Scibelli from the Western Mass Recovery and Wellness Center in Springfield under the jurisdiction of the Hampden County Sheriff's Department. And Anthony serves as the Assistant Superintendent and does great work over there with the staff, working with all of the clients and those people and families that receive assistance or receive resources through the Recovery Center and Wellness Center. But before we talk about the facility, of course, being our guest again, thanks for taking the time and being on the show with us. Just want to give you a few moments to maybe talk a little bit about your history, how you got to where you are today, your background, and what brought you into the field that you're serving in.
Sure. Thanks, Senator. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
So my path to working in alcohol and drug services kind of started on a personal journey. I'm a guy that in his early 20s really struggled with my own drinking, and was fortunate enough to have a lot of people, good people in my life, to give me guidance and direction. And I was fortunate to get in recovery in my early 20s. And one of the things after about a year of being clean and sober was suggested to me was to volunteer to give back. And I was directed to what we call at the time Howard Street, which is the Western Mass Correctional Alcohol Center, which is the former name of our current program. And so I volunteered there once a week. I brought men to self-help meetings in the community. And I did that for about 8 years. So I guess you could say I'm a little bit of a slow learner because it took me about 8 years to realize this is my passion. Right. And I did a 180. I was in financial services. I was actually a stockbroker, and I went home to my wife and said I want to be a substance abuse counselor. And she was supportive, and I went to Westfield State at the time, now Westfield University, and enrolled in the alcohol and drug addiction counseling program, and was lucky enough to get hired at the facility that we're about to talk about.
Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah.
So your personal history, thanks for sharing that with us, and maybe a little history about the facility and kind of how it came to be where it is now.
Sure, of course. So at the time, the Western Mass Correctional Alcohol Center was founded in 1985. So back in the early 80s and 82, they changed the drunk driving laws, a lot stricter penalties, and started incarcerating people for multiple drinking and drivings. And what happened is they noticed in the county jails about an increase in approximately 25% of the population as a result of that. And they did some further research and found that most of the people that were getting incarcerated, it wasn't like a one-time offense. They had been suffering from alcoholism, substance use disorder, and realized that in addition to taking them off the streets and preventing them from drinking and driving, they needed treatment. And Mike Dukakis was the governor at the time, and people might remember his wife Kitty had very public struggles with substance use, and so he knew he was a big believer in treatment. And there was a task force, and they opened 3 centers across the state, similar to ours. The other 2 have closed, I think, sometime in maybe the 90s, but we've been going since '85. And over the years, our curriculum has matured and changed as we saw the need, as well as our programming. In the late 80s, early 90s, we recognized there's a lot of people coming with other drugs and alcohol being addicted to. That was during the crack epidemic, so we adjusted our programming to address that. And then as early as 2003, we noticed people coming in addicted to heroin. So even back then, we started our opiate-specific programming. Recently, in the last decade, we've looked at trauma. First addressing our female, it's a co-ed facility, our female population, the trauma, and then probably in the last 5 years looking at the male trauma. So we're very proud to do that. And we just keep trying to stay on top of it and update the curriculum. In addition, it's 3-4 programs under one roof, really. We had what we've always had, our traditional substance disorder program for incarcerated men and women. That track, that's roughly an orientation week where they come in. We're a regional facility, so we draw from Worcester West. So the people will come in and just get used to what our expectations are. And they come in from all sorts of medium security facilities, so they might be a little guarded. So we just want to get them comfortable and ready for treatment. And then we have a 7-week treatment program, followed by 3 or 4 weeks of what we call phase 2, restitution phase. And we've been doing that since '85. And in addition to that, about 9 years ago, we opened the Foundation House, which is a halfway house in our facility. That was in the community, and it was on a grant, and essentially the grant ran out, and we knew there was still a need for housing. A lot of our offenders have burned every bridge in the community. You know, they don't have a family member to go back to, even programs. They've gone, and they're not able to go there. So we're sort of the last house on the block. So in the Foundation House, we have 24 beds for men on the second floor, and down off the women's unit, a room for women. And we'll have people in there who are on probation, parole, electronic monitoring. Some even make the very mature decision. They're completely free and clear, wrapped up from all their obligations, and they're not ready. They don't feel their recovery legs are strong enough, so they make the very mature decision to stay in our program and in that halfway house. So that program, what it does, it helps men and women continue to get connected in the community, get connected with gainful employment, and then we transition them to a safe home plan in the community.
And anybody who's familiar with the work that's done over there, you know, knows how great of a program it is. And, you know, as you mentioned, there were at one point there was 3 of these type of facilities across the state, and you know, the one here in Springfield is now the model, I would say, or the envy of a lot of other regions because of the great work that's done here, and especially the programming, and you know, all the great work and resources that you have that are part of the program, and the people too. I think, as you mentioned, you know, there's a lot of people that, you know, have been in a program or the program, and you know, come back and help and volunteer, which is really an amazing thing to see as well. So a little technical stuff, I think.
Sure.
You know, as you know, through our office, we, you know, interact with a lot of families and constituents that, you know, either them or their family members are struggling. And one issue that comes up quite a bit is the Section 35 process.
Right.
And, you know, not being an attorney myself, but, you know, have a little bit of familiarity with it as a legislator. Could you talk a little bit about it? And,
Sure.
you know, what is
Sure.
it? Who can
Sure.
ask for it? Who can request it? And how does that work?
Yeah. Yeah. So that is our latest program. We opened a 32-bed male unit in May at our facility, and in our Ludlow facility, 48 beds at the end of July. So yeah. So Section 35 program is for civil commitments, not criminal commitments. So if someone has a family member who's eligible to petition someone is a spouse, a blood relative, someone someone involved with them medically would be a psychiatrist or a doctor, probation officer, someone involved with them with the courts. Who can't petition is a boyfriend or girlfriend, a neighbor, an employer. What they would do is, and the purpose of it is, if you have someone in your life who you feel is dangerously ill, in imminent danger to themselves or others. So that's a criteria the court uses to section someone, which basically is committing them involuntarily into treatment. So, for instance, someone who's suicidal, someone who has a history of ODing, somebody who is maybe threatening others, homicidal, the kind of criteria. It can be as you, I'm sure, could imagine, a very stressful time for a family member. So I think the important thing to know is they can go down to the court. There's an advocate there for them. Go down there early. Believe it or not, a lot of the commitments are uncontested. When you finally get to that point, many times the person becomes willing to go along through with the process.
Right. So it's not a voluntary process. It needs to be, you know, instigated by a relative, a blood relative, or somebody
Correct.
that has a medical relationship, meaning a doctor or
Correct.
a practitioner.
Yep.
Now, when you had mentioned, is there a certain length to that program, or that is issued by the court, that they have a certain timeline that it has to be?
So if the judges, when the judge commits them, it's up to 90 days. The intent of it is, you know, it's determined that they're dangerously ill, and the intent of the Section 35 commitment is to stabilize them, to get them stabilized, and hopefully get them through the commitment with enough momentum to continue on to treatment. It's really the beginning part, to get them detoxed and stabilized so they're no longer a risk to themselves or others. And then hopefully our job is to throw everything we have at them and get them with enough hope and enough energy to make the commitment to a treatment program after that, maybe intense outpatient program, counseling, to engage in maybe some self-help meetings. There's a lot of different paths to recovery, and our message is just pick one.
In terms of recovery, or if someone is in the throes of addiction, especially for those family members who might be watching at home, does it matter what type of if they're in addiction with alcohol, or if they're in addiction with heavy narcotics? Does it matter at all what type of addiction that they have?
No, that's a great question. No, it doesn't. The program is for everyone, any kind of addiction, any kind of alcohol or drug or any kind of substance.
Right. And I know on the other side of the program, we're going to talk a little bit more about the relationship between the probation department and the courts and your facility and the criminal justice system. But we have about a minute left with this program. Could you talk a little bit about and you mentioned your own personal story, but how people that go through the program really do reinvest back into the program, and from a peer standpoint really try and help out those that are struggling now.
Sure. Yeah. So that is really the backbone of our facility. Since '85, we've had a thing called the escort program, where men and women in recovery, obviously the women with the women and the men with the men, come back. And there's nothing more powerful, in my opinion, than someone who's found recovery can make a connection with someone. Sometimes the shirt and tie or the sheriff ID can get in the way, where you have a community volunteer coming in on their own time.
Yeah, no, it's a very powerful program. We talk about peer mediation and peer recovery resources a lot in the legislature, but this is, your facility is something that's a facility that's actually doing it. It has it in action, and been over to the facility a number of times when it was on Howard Street and now on Mill Street, which we can talk about how that transfer happened. But to see the program in action and to really see, how people react to it and take to it is truly an amazing thing. And I just want to again just thank you for the great work that you're doing, and the staff at the facility is doing. Because as we all know, our communities are struggling with addiction right now, and it can happen to any family at any time, as you all know. And I just want to thank you again for that great work. And we're going to take a break for public service announcement, and then we'll come back on the other side and we'll talk a little bit more.
Great, thanks.
Sounds good.
They said I have troll teeth.
That my voice sounded like a possessed baby doll.
That no one would ever love someone as stupid as me.
That I was fat, ugly.
Disgusting.
The effect of bullying is potent.
We will no longer be the silent majority.
Now, when you see online bullying, there's something you can do about it.
We're gonna take action with the I.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness, and so are you.
Hi, and welcome back to Common Talk about the Commonwealth. I'm State Senator Jim Welch, and we're very fortunate to have on our program today Anthony Scibelli, who is the Assistant Superintendent at the Western Mass Recovery and Wellness Center in Springfield. In the first part of the segment, we talked a little bit about Anthony's background and a little bit about the facility and what type of programs and resources and happen at the facility, and for those that are able to receive services from the facility, what type of services are available. The one thing we also talked about at the end of the first segment was the Section 35 process. Many family members contact our office about, what is it, what does it mean, how does it work, and you did a great job explaining that in the last section. And but I did want to talk a little bit about the relationship between your facility, the courts, the probation department, the criminal justice system. for those that are watching at home and say, okay, well, I have a family member that could really use the services, and maybe Section 35 might be the way to go, but do they have to have some sort of criminal background to be able to qualify?
Right.
Can you explain how all of that kind of works together in conjunction with each other?
Sure. Yes. So we have a great working relationship with the courts and probation and parole and all the other criminal justice departments, and everybody is working to whether it is someone who's civilly committed in the Section 35 program or someone who comes through us who's incarcerated. Just what can we bring in terms of support and services to help this person correct their behavior, find recovery from substance use disorder. Probably 87, in the high 80% of people that get incarcerated suffer from substance use disorder. To help them to leave our care and be successful. In terms of civilly committed, they absolutely do not have to have any criminal involvement. That is, the civil commitment process has nothing to do with the criminal process. So if someone has someone that they're concerned about, they can absolutely go to the courts. There'll be an advocate there for them, help them walk them through the process. But to that also, if someone is on probation or does have some criminal involvement, they also are available for and eligible for the Section 35 process.
Thank you for explaining that. It's that's the one thing to keep in mind is that there's the civil process and the criminal process, and
Correct.
that's always,
That's right.
especially think for people watching at home, that's important to remember that you don't have to go through the criminal justice system to actually be eligible to receive services or to be committed.
That's right. And Sheriff Cochee, we got involved in this because Sheriff Cochee, through campaigning and then just his regular duties as sheriff, having many constituents come up, and the concern was there's no program on Worcester West for civil commitments. There was a request for a proposal over the years, but there's been no program open. So the sheriff is committed in the sheriff's department to helping with this crisis. And so the sheriff stepped up and charged us with, we're going to do this, we're going to open this. We have the space, we're going to make it work.
Yeah, the sheriff's done a great job advocating for resources, advocating for the program itself, and really taking the lead, I would say, almost across the state in terms of putting his money where the mouth is, and in terms of providing this type of service for our community. So when we talk about a civil commitment, what's, for people that might be watching at home that may be thinking about it and maybe have a loved one that this might make sense for, what's the first thing that happen? I know you said that you go to the court and there would be somebody there to help them walk. Is that the first step?
Yeah, they would go down to the court and someone will walk them through the paperwork, and you're petitioning to the judge to determine if they're in imminent danger. And then the first thing, once they are committed, everyone in Western Mass will go to the name of our treatment program is the Stony Brook Stabilization and Treatment Centers. And it's unique in that it's a step-down program. So there's two facilities, a facility in Ludlow and a facility on Mill Street where I work. Everyone will go who's sectioned in Western Mass to the Ludlow facility initially, and the first thing that they'll do is detox. And the minute they get in the door, they're seen by medical personnel to make sure that they're safe. There'll be an opportunity to notify the petitioner that they're safe. And the first step is to detox them, physically detox them from drugs and alcohol.
Now, obviously, it's a very difficult decision for many people to have to try and make, but in many cases, obviously, a life-saving decision. Do you have, I know it's hard to give advice, but what would you recommend for a family that is maybe either thinking about it or maybe they're just becoming aware of the Section 35 process? Is there people that they can talk to?
Yes.
And are there resources through your facility? What do you think is a good first step for a family?
So I think the most important message is that they don't have to do this by themselves. And there's a lot of resources and help and people that can walk shoulder to shoulder with them through the process. So they can call our facility for any resources. They can show up at our facility for any resources. They can go on the Sheriff's Department website. There's an 800 number as well.
And we'll put that up on the screen for people, and we'll put it up at the end as well so people know. But
Great.
So that would be the best first step is to contact somebody. You have to contact somebody, and either through your agency or through your facility. And even if it's not the right first place, somebody there will be able to direct them
Yeah.
in the proper direction.
Yeah, I think the most important message is that they can call the sheriff's department with any questions about that process, and we'll help them and point them in the right direction.
Right. Now, another, as a legislator, we hear all the time, and we try and work to correct it. But one thing we hear a lot is when a person is maybe making the first steps to trying to get into recovery, or their family's trying to, but there's no beds, right? So which is why it's so important that the sheriff Coachee and your facility have stepped up to to provide more beds. But a lot of times that's the first thing that we hear from families is that there's no beds anywhere.
Right.
What do you recommend, or what's the best course of action when a family member family is faced with that? Oh, there's no beds, there's no available space.
So, in terms of the Section 35 program specifically, Sheriff Coachee is committed to providing space. We started in Ludlow with 48 beds at Mill Street with 32, and at one point in August, we opened more space and we're up to 62. So the Sheriff's Department and Sheriff Coachee are committed in terms of the Section 35 process to not turn anyone away from Western Mass. In terms of outside of that, just community beds and a different route for someone who wants to get recovery. There is an 800 number which like you said, we'll put up, and it's just important to keep calling, keep trying, and don't give up.
Don't give up. Yeah. It all starts sometimes with a phone call.
Correct.
Just to answer some of the questions that a family might have. Now, what would be a typical? Let's talk about a family goes through this Section 35 process and has their loved one committed. What would be I'm sure there's steps along the way, but what would be a typical day in the life of someone who has been committed and who is receiving resources at your facility? So
the one important note is whether they're in Ludlow or they're at Mill Street, in either facility, there's the same programming. So wherever they end up or whatever amount of time they're at either place, they'll get the same classes and groups. But a typical day at our facility would be they would have anywhere from 4 to 5 groups, recovery groups. They would start the day with a peer-led reflection group where it's November, so it's gratitude month. So they might read something on gratitude and kind of kick it around. And then the other groups throughout the day would be things like they would have a group on what we call PAWS, post-acute withdrawal syndrome. And essentially what that is you have the physical symptoms of detox when you're detoxing, but even after the drugs or alcohol are physically out of your body, in a nutshell, you still feel lousy. So you might be happy at 10 and upset at 11 and grateful at 12, and it's a roller coaster of emotions. And the message is you can feel lousy but still be doing well. If you're going to your groups, if you're going to counseling, if you're doing the footwork, even though your feelings will catch up, just continue to know that you're doing well if you're participating. Now, and this is just a layman asking a question, but I would imagine that some people will say, well, that's not for me. My addiction is if they, obviously the first step, right, is admitting that there is an addiction. But I'm not addicted to alcohol. That place is not for me. Or I'm not addicted to opioids. This place is not for me. What would you recommend? I mean, how do you get past that? Because I would imagine that, for many people who are even entertaining the idea of going into recovery, a lot of times there might be a hurdle that they perceive is there that really isn't. And how do you get past that? Right. Well, that's the magic question. It really is, because denial. There's a saying in recovery that denial isn't just a river in Egypt, and that is the thing that gets a lot of people stuck, and that's the thing that makes it so heartbreaking, so frustrating when everyone around you can see that you have an issue with a substance, and you're still kind of hanging on to your right to that I'm okay. I don't need any help. So I think just people continuing to intervene and kind of holding up a mirror to the person is a way they can help. But it's heartbreaking, and that's what makes it so tragic. Yeah. Well, we have about 2 minutes left in the show, and the one thing I
I did want to talk about is, I have on here a question about recidivism, but I really want to ask, because I know your success rate at your program is very good. And can you talk a little bit about that and what that means?
Sure, sure. I mean, the sheriff's department has a doctoral level, a researcher, and we do get all the empirical data, and we look at that, and we make changes based on recidivism rates and all that kind of thing. But for sure. But I think the way that we look at success at the facility, in addition to that, is in any treatment program you can have a great schedule on the wall, but what's the culture? What is the culture? When the residents leave, or when they're struggling, are they calling back and asking for help? Do families feel comfortable if their son, daughter, husband, wife is struggling, calling, asking for help? Do they feel like it's a place where they can get help? And when that happens, we know we're in the right place. Quickly, we had when there was the tornado that came down Howard Street, and we were displaced for a few days, and our men and women had to go back to medium security, and quickly, it was 4 days, but at the time, the population, they didn't know if they were ever coming back. There's a lot of unknowns, and you walk into a pod up at the main jail with our men up there on a Saturday night, and they had voluntarily had formed in a circle their own recovery meeting, and that kind of sums up the culture. That's where we want to be in our facility. If that's the culture that we have, we're being successful, and we'll get the results.
Yeah, that's a positive image to think about. So we got about 15 seconds left, maybe just in one sentence or two. What would you say to families that are maybe watching at home that have a loved one struggling?
I'd say that no matter how many times they've tried, how much they've used, whatever the scenario, there's hope. I've seen thousands of men and women come through our facility, all sorts of situations. They're resilient and there's hope. So don't give up.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all the great work that you do in our community, and thanks Sheriff Kochi and his leadership on this issue. And for those of you that are watching at home, we appreciate you tuning in, and thanks for tuning in to Come and Talk About the Commonwealth, and we'll see you next time.